did you know it's estimated there are more than 100,000 people with multiple sclerosis in the UK. Each year, around 5,000 people are newly diagnosed with the condition. That means each week, 100 people are diagnosed with MS. Can you imagine how you would feel if that were you? Well, Claire Bale knows exactly what it's like. She lives with MS. She's on the line, and with me in the studio is Roshan DasNair from the University of Nottingham's Institute of Mental Health. Just before we hear from Claire, Roshan, just in case people don't know, can you just give us an outline of what MS actually is and how it affects people?
Yeah, sure. Multiple sclerosis, or MS, is a condition of the nervous system. In MS, the coating around the nerves gets damaged, and that causes a host of symptoms. The symptoms could be physical symptoms, such as problems with your balance or mobility problems, issues with your bladder and bowel, fatigue, or they could be psychological symptoms. Psychological symptoms are largely of two types. One, you've got emotional problems, so people have problems with their mood, like anxiety and depression, but also cognitive problems. What I mean by cognitive problems are problems that people encounter when they're trying to remember to do things. So problems with their memory, problems paying attention, problems solving daily life situations. So it can be quite varied, which is why sometimes MS is considered a snowflake kind of a condition, because each person's symptoms or profile of symptoms varies considerably. And as you clearly mentioned, there are over 100,000 people living with MS in the UK. It's usually diagnosed when people are in their 20s and 30s, so quite early on, but it's a lifelong condition, and unfortunately there is no cure. However, there are lots of physical treatments, psychological treatments, and medical and drug treatments that help people to manage their condition better and to deal with their symptoms better.
Okay. Am I right in thinking it's degenerative?
It is.
Right. So once you're diagnosed, and that's part of the psychological angle, I suppose, you know that you are, well, to be blunt, you're going to go downhill over however long it is.
For some people that is the case. For some people you might not find that much of a progression, and I'm sure Claire will have a view on that also.
Well, without further ado, morning Claire.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
I'm fine, yeah. When was it you were diagnosed?
Okay, so I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis in 2007, and it was a bit of a shock actually. It came very suddenly, unlike some people who have difficulties for a period of time. I lost the sight in one of my eyes, and we were very scared because we didn't know whether it was a brain tumour or something else. And it's very, very strange, really, that I actually feel quite fortunate that I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and not anything more serious than that. But it does present a number of challenges for an individual. And I'm very fortunate at the moment that I'm very fit and well, and I feel really great. But I know I have family members, and I work as a volunteer to help the research processes in Nottinghamshire. And I know people there's no one rule for MS. It doesn't have to be downhill all the way. People can experience many, many different things, and it affects everybody differently and at different times, and it goes up and down, etc. So you can get, as Roshan said, there can be all sorts of difficulties that you might experience, and you might not even know what's going on at the time. So you can experience fatigue and tiredness, vision problems like I did, sometimes problems with your bladder and bowel, which aren't always easy to talk about, but it does happen to us all, or to some of us anyway. You can get numbness and tingling and weakness and spasms and problems sometimes with your mobility and balance. It can be painful, and it can have a real challenge for it not to have a massive impact on your mood and your social activities, and sometimes even your work activities, because it means you have to adapt your lifestyle to enable you to carry on and to do the things that you really want to do and have an enjoyable life and meaningful relationships with the people around you.
Yeah. How long would you say it took for you to come to terms with your diagnosis?
Well, if I've got to be completely honest, and it probably took me about 4 or 5 years. I was very positive about my diagnosis, and I used it as an opportunity to really change my life and my lifestyle rather, and to challenge myself to do things that I'd not done before. But underneath that was an absolute fear of, as you said, that kind of initial assumption that you have that you're going to end up in a wheelchair. And so, it took a long time, and I didn't talk to anybody about it and didn't want to talk to anybody about it. So it can be a very challenging time. Now I'm very happy to share my experiences, but, when it first happened, it was very challenging.
I mentioned there the number of people being diagnosed and the number of people each week. So if you were in the position where you were sitting in front of someone who'd just been diagnosed, what advice would you give that person?
Okay, so, the assessment and the diagnosis process can be really challenging, as it is, because sometimes it can go on for a while. You can have niggling problems and you don't know what's going on, and sometimes it can be a relief, actually, to find out there is something going on. It can be very scary for me when I didn't know what was going on. In my first appointment to the hospital, I was taken for some treatment. I was taken to a hospital ward, and it was full of people in wheelchairs, and it terrified me. So, and it was a real big shock. And so my advice to people, and as I say, I'm very fortunate that I'm well, and I do have the odd problem, but, is really to say to them that, this doesn't have to be the end of your life. You're not necessarily going to end up in a wheelchair or with a stick or with no sight. But, if you do have things that challenge you on a day-to-day basis, don't be afraid of asking. Don't be afraid for looking for advice and to finding ways of adapting your life so that you can actually carry on and do things. There's lots of support out there. And if you have a really positive mental attitude, and you think, if you don't think, I can't do that, but just think, actually, I might do it a bit differently than I did before, or I might have to do it a bit differently, then, there's always a way to kind of get through some of that anxiety. And also to be mindful that sometimes it's harder for the people around you than it is for yourself. And I had lots of people saying to me, it was almost as if they were embarrassed and didn't know what to say, and they would say, how's your problem? And I would sort of look behind me as if they were talking about somebody else, and I would say, what problem? And so, it's a positive mental attitude. It goes a long way to kind of get you facing in the right direction. And I started doing yoga. I actually did I think I'd done one half marathon when I was a lot younger, and I did a half marathon after I was diagnosed, and one of my bosses at the time said, I'll sponsor you, and if you do it, I'll double it if you get in under a certain time. And I hobbled, and I was incontinent, but I got through and I did it, and it was great, and I felt so positive, and, I've